Hello and welcome to the Make Music Right podcast. We are on a mission to bring non-degenerate music of all genres to the forefront of American culture. I'm your host, Chloe Castillo, and joining me on today's episode is the National Director of Future Moms for America, Cassie Fletcher. How are you doing today, Cassie?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Chloe?
I'm great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm excited.
So, can you tell me a little bit about Future Moms for America, what inspired it, and I guess more than that, what's the mission?
Okay. Well, the mission of Future Moms for America is to bridge the generational gap between moms and future moms in order to prepare to raise patriots and to reclaim our culture and the republic for truth, family, freedom, and the Constitution.
That's wonderful. I love that. And so let's just bring that into music a little bit because you mentioned culture in there. And I think that we've talked about this a little bit before how conservatives and how women in the conservative movement specifically, and just women in general, should be kind of, I guess, homemakers of culture and how they should create this culture for the next generation, for their kids. And what kind of music do you think we should be focusing on creating in our culture today that will do that, that will provide a good, strong culture for the next generations, that will provide something that isn't full of, hatred towards God, hatred towards men, hatred towards good traditional values? What should we do as conservatives to create a counterculture that is good for the next generations?
Well, for one thing, I think we need to stop using that word counterculture because culture is what you make it. And if you're trying to counter the culture, then what you're doing is you're creating a culture war. And that is forcing people to choose sides, and that automatically alienates people. If you're not us, then you're them, and if you're them, then you're not us. And so we have to stop using that phrase of counterculture, because we're not trying to counter the culture. We're trying to move the culture. We're trying to adjust the direction that the culture is going in. And that's not necessarily a counter movement. We don't have necessarily need to go backward. When you talk about countering, you're talking about rebuffing, you're talking about repelling, you're talking about turning it around and going in the complete opposite direction. We don't necessarily need to go in the complete opposite direction. There's nothing wrong with shifts in taste and in music and movies and things like that. Just as an example, I remember when I was, growing up 30 years ago, when I was 6, 7 years old, that things like, you know, comic books and video games were for nerds, right? They were outside of culture. They were, not the end thing. And now, you know, that's like the biggest thing in culture right now. Pop culture is comic movies and Marvel and DC and all of the big things that used to be, you know, for nerds. And that's become part of our culture. And it's not because what used to be was bad, that it wasn't like the culture that we had was necessarily bad. Sure, there were bad things. There's always bad things everywhere. But it was just a shift. And it wasn't going against the grain. It wasn't trying to change everything and invert it and put it on its head or whatever. It was just about moving in a slightly different direction. There's no reason why we can't take what's popular now in movies and music, especially. Music is easy to shift the tide with. Music changes from day to day, and that's easy to just kind of tweak a little bit, adjust the current so it's moving in a slightly different direction. um One thing that comes to mind is Taylor Swift. She's mega popular, super out there. Everybody knows who she is and the music that she produces and that sort of thing. And one thing that people don't realize is that the Taylor of now is not the Taylor of, 20 years ago when she first got started. Because that Taylor, she had good music, good messages, good movement for the culture. She talked about all sorts of things in her songs that were true and relatable about what it meant to be a girl, not to hate women or that you have to be a or not to hate men or that you have to be a girl boss or whatever, but that it was just a good message. Um, that this idea of, have going into high school as a 15-year-old and meeting your bestest best friend that you feel like you've known forever, and then your friend gets herself in trouble and she's heartbroken, and the two of you have to work through that and figure out what that means and how that's going to affect you moving forward. That's a good message. And I think that a lot of this idea of countering the culture means that we have to throw away everything that's not us, everything that is not produced by us because it's them. And I don't think that's true. There is good stuff everywhere on all sides. There's good messages that need to be cultivated. What we need to do in order to move the culture in the right direction is to take the good from them and allow us to integrate into it. If we take those good things and we push them out in a way that is fun and exciting and popular, we're going to do a lot more good than if we were constantly preaching to the choir and trying to force people in the direction that we think they should take. That's not how that works. We're uh, we were born free. We, especially here in America, we thrive on freedom, and we need choices. We need options. The problem that we're seeing is not that, you know, the culture is degrading so quickly that we have to erase it from existence. It's that we're not taking advantage of what is. We're so focused on making ourselves stand out that we don't allow the good on all sides to come in.
Right.
And that's something we don't, it's not just in music, it's in movies, it's in television shows, it's everywhere.
I think we
But
have to take the culture that's there, like you said, that is good, and we have to mold it into the right direction. We can't just take it and say, you're trash, you're awful. I think we do need to be careful as well, though, too, that a lot of times, like, separating ourselves is good in some ways. Like Taylor Swift, for example, she used to be, a great artist. I mean, I was never into her music, but her message was good, actually good. It was constructive. It wasn't something that was, anti, men, anti God, whatever. It was just something that was a good message. It was wholesome and people could relate to it. And I think that now as conservatives, and it's just, I keep saying as conservatives, and I mean that because we're in a movement trying to change, our culture, trying to make it better, trying to change our country in the direction it's been going. But just anybody really, beyond if you label yourself a conservative or not, anyone who wants to see good change in America, in our culture, I think needs to see the importance of a culture shift. Whether that be, maybe not counterculture, but more of a culture shift, something that's promoting, I guess, just a straight up good culture, something that is creating for the next generation, something that is directing people's minds, directing people's motives and what they do in life. We talked a little bit before a while ago about the me kind of movement in culture. And I think that that's something we need to really get away from, that the me culture and view on life in general is very destructive with the conservative movement and just in our regular culture as well. And I think that, like you said, when we try to look at like, oh, look at us, we're different, it's more of a matter that we need to in culture show, look how, I guess not look how good we are, but look how much better these alternatives are in culture. Not about us and our, we're throwing Donald Trump kind of music in your face, although I do like it myself. I think it's fun, but it's not about our political motives. It's about our culture and about what we want to create for the next generations. And if we want to create, Ice Spice twerking, and we want to create Lil Nas X hanging upside down on the cross, that's not a good thing. But if we just want to create something decent and of good value that people can relate to and that holds wholesome values, I think that's really important to save America and to take back our country and culture just on the whole.
no, I absolutely agree. There's this, um, I don't want to say that it's it's hard to really kind of get into this because there's so much on every side. But I think something that really has to be addressed is this idea of conservative and liberal, and the me versus the individual versus the communal. And the problem that we're really seeing, I think, is that the definition of conservative and the definition of progressive have really very much been skewed, because we're still looking at them as if they mean what they meant before, you know. um and what I mean by that is that, we're looking at the liberal movement as if it is, trying to create all of this awful, quote progressive change. It didn't. And we look at the past as if that's how it always was. What people don't realize is that there was a shift in history. At one point, the people who were liberal became the conservatives, and the
Yes.
people who were the conservatives became the liberals. And what why that happened is because the conservative values that people were trying to uphold and uplift back in the day were not necessarily the traditional family values that we think of now when we call ourselves conservative, because those were just a given. That was just the way life was. What they were trying to conserve was a society that was broken. They were trying to conserve this us versus them mentality, this black versus white, this, you know, red versus blue, this whatever the case. They were trying to preserve the class system, keep people separated. And that's why a lot of times the conservative movement now gets a bad reputation, because it's being associated with the conservative movement of the past, and things have changed because it was the liberals who were saying, we need to break this system and, come together in unity and purpose and have one, human race. The problem is that we got that, right? We got that. We got that in music, we got that in movies, we got that in television, we got that in culture, we got that in 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 life in general, in society. There's nothing that you can't do as a woman now. There's nothing that you can't do as a black person, as a Hispanic person, as a Latina person, as whatever. There Asian, Russian, Martian. There's nothing that you can't do in America now. The problem is that now we have to create problems because we solved all of the problems. And that's what we're seeing in culture now. We're seeing this push to reaffirm the past conservative movement values, that we have to become so individualized that we're divided. And it's happening in everything. And one of the easiest ways that this is done is through culture. And they didn't counter the culture when they created the culture that we currently have. I remember when I was a kid, and the big thing was inclusivity, right? It wasn't diversity, it was inclusivity. And all of the shows that I watched as a kid, the cartoons, the live action, the books that I read, they were people of all races and colors and ethnicities and cultures, and they were all together as friends. The 90s was probably about as utopic as you can get in any sort of cultural society, in just the sense of inclusivity. And we've lost that in this push for diversity. And we've started segregating people again based off of their color, based off of their culture, based off of whatever. And we see this even in the conservative movement, because if you're, you know, there are different types of conservatives, right? You've got the Christian conservatives, you've got the diehard conservatives, you've got the progressive conservatives, you've got whatever. Um, and we have to stop thinking of ourselves as us and them, and start thinking about ourselves as us as a whole. There there is, I think, a push against that because of the whole idea of communism, right? communism is all about giving the power to a very select few who then use that power to oppress and make sure everybody is equal. It's not equality, it's equity. And it's not good for anybody if, for whatever reason, I'm going off on a tangent, but for whatever reason, people my age and younger have this idea that in socialism, everybody's going to be living like Bill Gates. Like, like we need a redistribution of wealth so that everybody is on the same page. And they don't realize that what that means is that everybody is going to be living like the people who are on welfare, not like they're living like Bill Gates. And a lot of that has to do with what we're consuming
Yes.
culturally.
Yes.
We get those messages in music that, oh, and this isn't a new thing. I think about the Beatles, John Lennon, right? Just imagine. And that song is all about communism.
Right.
What we need is not communism, it's community. And there's a big difference. There's nothing wrong with coming together as a community in your local area and building up a local culture that is something that you have a say in. And I think that's something that we don't really consider so much anymore. We're so focused on moving the culture as a whole in the direction that we want it to move that we don't stop to think about it's the small little things that really move culture. If you don't like the what culture looks like right now, then going on Twitter, X, whatever, and saying how Taylor Swift is a terrible, awful, horrible person because of her music now and the way she dresses and the way that, she does whatever, that's not going to change anything. It's just going to make the war that much more personal, but it just makes everything that much more ugly. Where we need to change the culture is not out there. It's right here in
Right.
our own homes, in our own families, in our own communities. I have 9 nieces and nephews, and I would go to the moon and back for those babies. And that means that I have to start creating things where I am that are things that I feel comfortable with them consuming, things that their parents feel comfortable with them consuming. This is going a little bit off of the music direction, but I'm a narrative communications scholar. That means that I work in the um, pop culture and how pop culture, how, ugh, I can speak English. I like to
You're
rephrase.
good.
That so at how pop culture is created and also how it influences people.
Yes.
This culture didn't just happen. 30 years ago, it began very slowly, and we've been moving in that direction. It's like when you go to the airport and you have those people movers,
Mhm.
you get on it, and even if you're walking with it, yeah, it looks like you're sprinting. But even if you're just standing there, you're still moving.
Mhm.
It's still moving you in that direction. Well, it's not going to help us to turn around and walk against the people mover. We're still moving in the opposite direction. What we have to do is we have to turn around and we have to walk with the culture in a way that's going to get us to where we want to go, not necessarily where it's taking us, or at least not where it's taking us in the time that it's taking us. So, um, I started a I don't know, I guess you could call it a campaign of sorts, sort of like what you're doing with Make Music Right. It's called Abby's Fairy Tales, and I have a podcast. I have stories that I tell. I've turned them into picture books. I'm doing um, activity books and workbooks and all sorts of things because that's what I can do to move the culture for my nieces and nephews.
Yes.
Because when they go to the library and they want to pick out books, there are a lot of books there now that I don't want them to see, that their parents don't want them to see. And they're dressed up like Clifford or, you know, Arthur, or as I'm dating myself with all of these like 90s children's book references, but they're dressed up like cute little things that kids want to engage in, and the messages that they have are dangerous. They're antisocial. And we've kind of appropriated that word to mean somebody who re- pulls themselves out of society. That's not what that means. Antisocial means that it is against society. It is against the communal makeup of society. Pro-social is what brings the community and the society together. And I'm kind of like going off on my PhD scholarly tangent over here with all of this, you know, jargon, but what I'm doing, what you're doing, is we're taking the good in society and we're cultivating it. We're not trying to change it. We're trying to rise it to the top. You know, when you're out in a garden and you want to, you've let it run over for so long, it doesn't do any good necessarily to raise the whole thing to the ground, because there might still be good fruit there. There might still be plants that are growing and flourishing and providing nourishment. And if you have a garden that's alive, that's still thriving, but it's choked out with weeds, you don't rip out your healthy tomatoes with the dandelions. You have to go and you have to root out the weeds.
Mhm.
And it's a lot harder than just, having a blank slate to work with. But what be and getting into this garden analogy a little bit deeper, there are things that a healthy garden can produce that if you were to start over, you're starting completely over.
Mhm.
You lose those plants that are mature, that are strong, that have good deep roots. And one of the things that I really love about what you do over at Make Music Right is you don't discard what's good just for what is necessarily conservative.
Right.
That we can still recognize that, 10 years ago, Taylor Swift was making good music with good messages without, you know, accepting that what she's doing now is good, because it's not. She's
Mhm.
making garbage music now.
Mhm.
She's not even it just what is it, that song, "Look What You Made Me Do"?
Mhm.
That's literally all she says through the entire song,
Yeah.
and it's just garbage,
Mhm.
but people buy it because it's Taylor Swift.
Mhm.
Because what's happened is people formed, what we're seeing now, which is really dangerous for upcoming generations, is that the moms and future moms who are mad Swifties right now, who are taking their daughters and their nieces to go see Taylor Swift in concert right now, are doing it because they liked who she was 20 years ago. They connected with her. They created a relationship with her, a parasocial relationship. And what that means is it's a relationship that you have with somebody that you don't know, but you feel like you do, whether that's a musician or an actor or a character from a book or a movie who doesn't exist. We've all had them. I had one, it ended badly, but that's not here nor there. And so they have this relationship with who she was and how she made them feel when they were 15 and growing up and just trying to find out who they were and how they fit into this world without losing who they are.
Mhm.
And that's what they're carrying with them. But what they're doing is they're introducing their daughters to a completely different Taylor Swift than the one that they knew. And the Taylor Swift that these young girls are creating a relationship with is not that relatable girl next door who's just trying to make it. It's this deific icon of culture, and it's moved from this you know interpersonal type relationship into basically worship.
Mhm.
And we see it everywhere, not just on the left, but on the right too. There's a serious problem that people have with deifying cultural figures. And one of the things that we really need to do if we're going to shift this culture is to help people recognize that worship is unhealthy when it comes to people, because they're just people. There's a saying I have all the time: when you stop treating people like people, they stop treating you like people. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, these people who are worshiping these pop culture icons, or these, cultural icons, whoever they may be, whether they're right or left or middle or outer space. They're worshiping these people as if they are gods or something. I don't know. But that's on us. We are responsible for shifting that culture. We're responsible for making sure that it doesn't ever get to that. And if you want to change the culture, the only way that you're going to do that is by making the shift in your personal life. What are
Absolutely.
you listening to? What are you watching? What are you reading? What are you feeling about the people who create these things? Because that's going to reflect on the children that are all around us, and not just the children that we're raising, but just the children in our sphere of influence, whether that's your personal children, your nieces or nephews, your brothers or sisters, that kid across the street, the children that you meet at church, the children that you teach at school because you're a teacher, whatever. We're always affecting children. We don't live in a bubble. We we have to be aware of the fact that our life is going to touch the lives of other people. And if you don't like where culture is, you have the power to shift it, to move it in the direction that you want it to go. If you like Taylor Swift, great. But introduce your kids to her good stuff before you start letting them get into the weeds.
Right. Yes. And, I think you have to be careful with a little bit of that as well, with accepting what looks good. And I think that's one thing in the conservative movement that we need to do is we need to stop relying solely on what's good from the past. I think Taylor Swift's old music's probably great. It's probably very wholesome, very sweet. And I think that letting your kids understand that that part of her was good and was wholesome and that's no longer like that is a good thing. And I think it's a good example too to show, you mentioned this another time we were talking, that she's a great example of the culture shift. She started out as something that was, I guess, very wholesome in a way, and she's really moved with this leftist culture and become extremely progressive, extremely, anti so many good things, honestly. And I think that as conservatives, what we can do is we can create something in our culture that our children can, I guess, consume in a way that is healthy and it isn't idolatry and it isn't just saying, okay, well, some of her music's good, so we're going to listen to that, but we're relying on that. We're not changing culture. I think that there needs to be, to take back America and to take back our culture, we need to be able to create new culture and not just a counterculture. I like that you said that. We're not just tearing down what you already have there. We are making a shift in what's already there. We're bringing out the good and we're trying to feed that and make more of that. And the conservative movement, and women especially in culture, can be the homemakers, kind of clean house with what we've got in the conservative movement, and hopefully that will, spread out to culture in America on the whole. And I really agree with what you have to say about what you can do now. If you don't like culture where it's going, you can change it by changing your personal consumption of culture. If you don't like where it's going, you don't like, oh, like you said another time, I don't want my kids to grow up in this kind of America, this kind of culture. Well, then change it now. Change it by not consuming Lil Nas X, or not just saying, oh, well, it's not something I listen to, but it's okay if you want to. It's like, no, let's make more of an effort to hold ourselves in society to a higher standard. Let's make our kids see, oh, this is really good. We should strive towards this, not just settling for whatever we're fed by the masses. And I think
Yeah.
that, or rather fed by, I guess, the higher powers to the masses. And I think that as conservatives, starting there, just because we have one starting point, we can't start over the whole entire culture. I think that we need to really understand that we have to create that alternative, and we have to create something that people will enjoy, and we have to build up what is there and what especially with the conservative musicians that are already there, we have to build them up, we have to promote them, we have to show this is something good, this is something you should consume, this is a great culture that is being kind of left behind in the dust, honestly.
Yeah, well, I really like, I love that. And I love that, you're talking about we don't necessarily have to go to the past to pull out what's good from the past and just keep perpetuating it. People don't realize that, yes, Mozart and Frank
Right.
Sinatra and all of these artists of the past, yes, they made good, wholesome, strong, culturally powerful music, but they were the popular people back in their day. They weren't they didn't just, exist and somehow made it. No, they were in the culture that they made it their own. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Mozart is that he lived in his culture. He
Mhm.
knew the music. He knew the what was popular in print and in, well, on it they only had print back then. Print and storytelling and the music that they told. He knew what it was. He was deeply immersed in culture. And that's allowed him to take what was popular and change it into something classic that
Yes.
has lasted for so long. And I think it's a really great idea to promote good, wholesome artists and content creators now who
Mhm.
can take the culture as it is now and move with it. That you can have the evolution in music, the beats and the, I don't know, I'm not like a music scholar person. I'm more on the narrative side, but you can take those things. It's the same thing that I did with the fairy tales that I'm creating for my nieces and nephews. I took what currently exists right now and I'm creating new content that has good, wholesome messages. That's still a lot of fun.
Mhm.
There's still fairies in it. There's still mermaids in it. There's still giants. There's still pirates. There's still all of those things that are popular that kids really enjoy, but with a good message.
Mhm.
And we can't just expect this monumental cultural change that's going to be completely different from what we have. It doesn't work that way. You have to work within culture if you're going to move culture in a different direction. And if you want to see more conservative artists, then it's going to have to sound less like, you know, I'm sorry, it's going to have to sound less like Christian music
Mhm.
and more like Taylor Swift,
Mhm.
because that's what the masses want. You have to go where they are if you're going to move them to where you're at. And there's, I think, a big resistance to that in the conservative movement. This resistance of, well, if it was created by them at all, then it's just it has to be discarded, it has to go away. And you can't do that. You can't just wholesale dismiss it, because that's where the culture is right now. You can't just say, well, we're just going to completely erase that and we're going to start creating, you know, classical music like Mozart did, and that's going to be the new popular music. Yeah, I mean, good luck with that. I think
Exactly.
that's a great goal, but you're gonna have to work really hard to get people to swallow that. And ultimately what you're doing is you're sprinting against the people mover and you're not getting anywhere.
Mhm.
You're just People are just looking at you like you're a lunatic.
Mhm.
And so if we want to change things, we're going to have to take culture as it is and make it better as it is so that we can move it in a different direction, because just telling people to change isn't going to do anything.
Absolutely, you're spot on. So, on that note, to wrap up here, um, Make Music Right is providing the playlist, the background music for Moms for America's 20th anniversary celebrations upcoming this February. It's going to be through the February, what is it, the 29th?
The 29th to March 2nd.
Perfect. And so we're super excited about that. And this playlist is going to be all conservative artists, yet it's not just going to be all Christian music. It's going to be all kinds of fun stuff on that list. Really good culture, a lot of things that I actually hadn't even heard of until I started digging and trying to find this music. So I'm like, wow, I'm going to create a playlist for this fantastic organization. And I don't even know like half the concerted music out there. So I started digging and I found so many amazing artists, so many songs out there that are just good quality music that isn't being promoted in our culture. And so I'm very excited about starting there with you guys, having that music promoted at your event, having it just in the background for people to hear and to say, hey, that sounds pretty cool. And, where did that come from? What culture is this? And
Yeah.
so I'm very excited about that. And so could you just tell my audience a little bit about that event?
Yeah, so this is going to be really fantastic. It is our 20th anniversary in November of 2024, and it's so crazy that it has been that long. But we are really blowing it out in a big way. We have Jim Caviezel is our headliner. He is, I think most people will know him now from, oh my gosh, the name of the movie
Sound of
just
Freedom.
Cry Freedom, Sound of Freedom. Yeah, Cry Freedom is a totally different one. Sound of Freedom. um, so Sound of Freedom, I actually knew him from the Count of Monte Cristo, and I think a lot of Christians know him from the Passion of the Christ. But he'll be there. He's our one of our headliners. We have all sorts of just amazing speakers lined up. It's going to be a fantastic 3-day event. We have our Boots and Bling get together. We have our gala that I believe is on Friday night. And then we also have a few meetups. So we have our Grammy Grizzlies, which is for all those grandmas out there who feel like they're alone in this fight and they can get together. But we also have a Future Moms for America meetup. And that's really exciting because it's going to be our first real kind of get together and get to know each other, to recognize that just because you're not married and you don't have children doesn't mean that you don't have a voice in this culture, in how it moves. We are just as important as the moms and the dads in this culture, because there are things that only we can do as women who are not yet moms, who to affect the future for the children that are coming, whether that is the children that are already here, like I said, our nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, kid down the street, or the children that we hope to come. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we need to recognize that we are valuable as women, as homemakers, as um, you know, future moms, that we can make those changes to culture right now just by being who we are, being willing to cultivate a powerful, strong, good culture to move forward with.
So wrapping up quickly, go to momsforamerica.com, get your, or .net is it? .com. Moms,
It's .us, momsforamerica.us.
go to Moms for America, get your tickets, and I hope to see you there. I'm going to be there. I can't wait. And Cassie, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Chloe.